My name is Danielle Henry. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist associate and the founder of Dream Life Out Loud Psychotherapy, Coaching, and Consulting. And I have been working with Lanaya Grayson, the executive director for RISE, over the past several months as she conceptualized a way to support the ladies that have lost their partners to gun violence. Working with her has been an absolute joy as she has used so much of herself to pour into the community. And what we're doing with RISE is addressing the needs in the Black community to end the cycle of violence directly resulting from firearms. If we look at a national level, looking at the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence, we know that the leading cause of death for Black men is gun violence. We also know that for Black men between the ages of 15 and 34, they make up just 2% of the population in the United States, yet they make up over 40% of the homicides resulting from gun violence. We also know that Black men are 20 times more likely to die from firearms than their white counterparts. Now, when we zoom in and focus on King County, when we look at the state of Washington, we are on par with the national statistics related to Black men and gun violence. In this county alone, based on the recent report from the King County Prosecutor's Office, we know that year over year, we are seeing gun violence rates surge dramatically. And we also know that over 40% more deaths from 2020 to 2021, and that Black men in King County make up 50% of the deaths in King County resulting from gun violence. This is a public health crisis, and it is incumbent upon all of us to address the needs of our neighbors, our brothers, our sisters, our families, our community, people who we go to school with, who we work with, who we pass by in the grocery store, who check us out in the grocery stores. It is absurd to think that systemic racism is not a part of the reason why we are seeing the staggering numbers of deaths amongst Black men in our communities. If you are wondering why the violence, why gun violence, why the tragedy and bloodshed on our streets, in our neighborhoods, it is helpful to look at the communities in which we are seeing the highest rates of gun violence. We see that there is a concentration of poverty. We see limited access to resources. We see a lack of skills. We see underperforming schools. We see racism in our schools. When we look at Seattle Public Schools and the achievement gap, of course, we are attempting to address the systemic disparities that we see, but we are seeing the results of communities that have, for one generation to the next generation, been underserved. We are also seeing a lack of access to public resources. We're seeing people who don't have the fluency to explain the experiences that they have, both emotionally and within their communities. We see folks turning to gangs, turning to negative coping mechanisms in order to heal and to rise up from their circumstances. So it's not difficult to understand how racism plays a factor in what we are seeing on our streets. One thing that is important to note is that when you are in community with African Americans, the descendants of enslaved Africans here on US soil, when you are in community with Black folks, our problems are your problems. And it is so apparent that we need a full court press effort to address what we're seeing, the violence that we're seeing in our streets. We need resources. We need resources for community organizations who have a boots on the ground approach. Folks who, these are our families that are dying, our nephews, our cousins, our brothers, our sons, our partners, our husbands, our babies, and we need your help. We need our help. We are our help. While there are countless community organizations that are organizing to meet the needs of our community and to stop the violence, we also need resources for healing and empowerment. And what Lanaya Grayson has been able to conceptualize for our community is unparalleled. And when I first joined the Ladies of Rise, I knew these women were incredibly strong, despite the tragedy, despite the pain, despite the hopelessness. And what we really need is to break the cycle. That requires that community effort to work with young Black men, but it also requires us to address the needs of the communities that are directly impacted and suffering as a result of the violence that we're seeing. It is incredibly difficult to imagine the level of grief that these ladies and their babies and their families are going through. But layer on top of that, wondering where your next meal is going to come from. Layer on top of that, whether or not your lights are going to work when you return home. If in fact you have a home and you're not couch surfing from one family member to the next, imagine what it's like when you have no understanding of the complicated emotions that you're experiencing related to the loss. And finally, imagine trying to explain to your child what it is, how to make sense of this type of loss. Imagine also these ladies who do have hope and such an incredible amount of resilience and ability to, in fact, rise up against the negative experiences that they're dealing with. I've never been more impressed and inspired by how admirable these women are in addressing their needs, being so thoughtful and intentional about learning what it is they're experiencing, understanding the grief process, understanding the stages of grief, understanding how to explain explicitly to their child that their fathers will never be coming home again, but that they will live in our hearts forever. And that from these tragic stories that we have, we will rise up and we will be better. We will gain skills. We will find employment. We will tap into resources. And not only that, people like Lanaya Grayson will pour her whole heart into this community and help all of us rise up and be better to address these needs. So one of the distinctions with marriage and family therapy is a systemic approach. And so when I come into space with the ladies in group, not only am I approaching their needs on an individual basis, but also considering the systemic focus and perspective that it's not only them that is grieving, it is likely their parents, the parents of their partners who they've lost. It is the children, it is the community, it is the healthcare workers who are trying to save the lives of these young men. It is our law enforcement agencies. It is innocent bystanders. It is an entire community. And so when we look at the system and try to understand the limited access to resources, to mental health resources for these women to understand their experiences, one of the first approaches was psychoeducation around grief and what that looks like. Asking the ladies pointed questions and explaining what depression is, If you were depressed, how would you know? What would that look like? How are we using substances, and to what degree are we using those as a means for coping? And so that was the initial phase, is really that psychoeducation piece to bring some fluency and understanding to the experiences that the ladies are having. But beyond that, we absolutely need collective healing spaces for the Black community. We need spaces in which we can come together and be our full, authentic selves in all of our pride and all of our glory, in all of our swag, in all of the ways that we move, the way that we talk, the way that we sing. We need spaces where we can come together and just be. And I think the ladies, over time, from one session to the next, it is like a beautiful flower blossoming as you see them begin to create that community and really a sisterhood, unfortunately born out of the most tragic circumstances, but a sisterhood no less, where there is another woman that they can look at that looks like them, that has experienced similar things. And yet, while they don't fully know one another's stories, as Black women, we know our stories. And so there's a certain level of sisterhood even in that. Another approach is helping the ladies to destigmatize their mental health, helping them to connect with why it is so important for them to develop healthy coping mechanisms, for them to model healthy ways of coping for their babies, for their families. I'm a firm believer that it takes just one person to make changes and influence those changes within entire communities. And that's what we hope to do with the support group. Another avenue of change is to help the ladies identify, what are my goals? Despite the tragedy and the loss and the grief and the pain and the uncertainty of their days and where they're next, how they're going to pay their bills and how they're going to lift themselves out of the depression that they're experiencing in order to show up for their babies, is this idea that they will rise up, they will become better, and that they can gain skills. And so helping them to identify, where am I at today and where can I be tomorrow or in a month or in 3 months? Helping them to destigmatize talking about what their experiences are, helping them to be empowered to identify what those resources are that they need, that them specifically, and helping them have a sense of hope, have a sense that we are there for them, whether it be just to hold the space and simply hear that pain and be there with them, or to point them in the right direction so that they can gain the skills that they need to cope with whatever comes their way. It's hard to forget Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, as I talk about the violence that we're seeing here in our neighborhood. When we think about caste, we know that Black people are at the bottom of the bottom. And if we double click into the bottom of the bottom, we know that Africans are at the top of that bottom. And then African Americans are at the bottom, with Black men above Black women by nature of being male. And thus, African American women are at the bottom of all of the bottom. And yet there's this assumption that we are so strong because we have to be, because it's in our DNA, because we were born with that strength. But we have to be able to tap into healing in order to really find our superpower. And so when we think about these ladies and their healing will influence the healing of generations and generations of African Americans in this country. They have the power to break the curse. And you have the power to help us atone for the enslavement of Africans on US soil that is resulting in decades and decades and hundreds of years of pain and disparities within the Black community. And so if I leave you with nothing else about Black women, is that we have the power to be great no matter our circumstances. And all we need is a chance. All we need is resources. And we have the power to heal. We have the power to show up for our families, our babies, our partners, our loved ones, and even our community. One of the activities that we do for the group is a burning release ceremony. And we try to bring attention to the idea that because Black women are so strong, we carry so much of that pain in our bodies. We see it by way of hypertension and diabetes and obesity and heart disease. And so when, it is a false, it's a false truth that we're so strong. We take the toll, our bodies take the toll, and our bodies keep the score of all the pain and all the trauma, the unhealed trauma, the untreated trauma within our bodies. And so one of the best parts about RISE and the support group is that Lanaya has organized care providers and healers and mental health therapists who look like these ladies, Black women, Black men who are professionals and know how to address and treat the symptoms that we see across the families within RISE. So as a mental health therapist, we are always bringing attention to the present moment and what we're experiencing in our bodies. So throughout group, we encourage the ladies to experience their emotions, to process through that pain as a way to release that from our bodies, to release that toxicity that attaches to our organs and create this unhealthy body internally. With the Rise for Us 2021 campaign, we have the ability to offer our support to our community members, our neighbors who are suffering from the result of gun violence in our communities. With the Rise for Us 2021 campaign, we have an opportunity to break the cycle of trauma in the Black community here in our neighborhoods. We have the ability to provide resources for the children who are suffering from the loss of their fathers. We have the ability to put resources into communities that have under-resourced schools, underfunded education programs, a lack of resources for public services. You have the ability to help us rise up against this violence. It's been a pleasure speaking with you about both RISE and the ladies of the support group. Again, I'm Danielle Henry, licensed marriage and family therapist associate and founder of Dream Life Out Loud Psychotherapy, Coaching, and Consulting. You can find me at www.dreamlifeoutloud.com or connect with the Rise for Us 2021 campaign with Lanaya Grayson. We would love to chat with you further about how to help us support RISE and the ladies in the support group. Thank you.